The SBA just released some data on the approval rates and the numbers for the targeted $10,000 EIDL advance. And the numbers are frankly a bit surprising and a bit frustrating, for lack of a better explanation. I'm not sure why there actually isn't more coverage on this, because I haven't really seen many articles or anything covering this. But because the numbers are so surprising, and I'm not in the business of trying to upset people or get people riled up, I thought the best way to approach this would be to reach out to the SBA for comment and clarifications, just so we can better understand what's going on instead of just going into this with some kind of rage. So we're gonna cover this new data, and then we're gonna dive into what the SBA has said about this, because they responded to my questions about this new data. And then I'd like to highlight a silver lining to these numbers that I actually didn't even think about until talking to the SBA. So it's not all bad. You might even leave this video a little bit pleasantly surprised, but there's some parts that are going to be frustrating as well. So let's just go ahead and hop right into the data here. This was just released the other day on the SBA website on April 29th. And this covers the loans that were approved and the EIDL grants that were approved. Actually, let's first take a look at the last report so we can do some comparisons. This was on February 16th, and we can see this was the loans approved at that time, 3.7 million loans approved for a total amount of just over $200 billion. And as of February 16th, there was no $10,000 EIDL grants that were actually approved and in anyone's bank account. And then we have April 29th, the most recent report. We can see 3.793 million loans approved, just a little bit more on the total dollars approved, $5 billion more in funding. What this tells me is that the EIDL loan size has dramatically decreased if they have that many more approvals. However, there's only $5 billion more spent with the program, which makes sense because most large businesses probably already got their EIDL loan, and they don't even think EIDL anymore, where now smaller businesses are now understanding what this program is and getting access to the funding. But this isn't the surprising part. The surprising part is the EIDL grant. So if we scroll down a little bit, we can see here advances approved, 89,000 advances. There's only been 89,000 advances approved in total across the entire United States as of the 29th of April. And this was really surprising and a little bit upsetting to see that there's so few approvals when I know there's so many people who have applied and are banking on this program. I mean, I feel like I have more people who view my videos on the EIDL than have been approved for the advances. And that's just frustrating for me to see, for a total dollar amount approved of just over $700 million. And we can see on a state-by-state basis, like my home state of Arizona, only 1,000 businesses have been approved here in Arizona. And I'm sure you can see your state on this list as well. You can pause it and take a look at how many actual approvals were in your state. So I was a bit surprised and frustrated with this data. So I reached out to the SBA to see what they have to say on it. That way we're not just having some kind of freak out fest here. Also, if you're interested in supporting my channel on a further basis, go ahead and check out my Patreon, which is linked in the description. Don't feel obligated to join, but I've started this and I'm pretty excited about it. So you can check that out if you're interested. So from here, let's talk about what the SBA had to say about these numbers. So I asked them 3 questions. Is the rate of approved advances increasing over time? Do we have an estimated number of past weekly approvals versus anticipated future approvals? Is there anything that's currently being done to speed up this process? That way more businesses get approved quicker, because there's a lot of people waiting on the funding here. And then third, is there any other helpful information that the SBA could provide on the approvals for both the past and the future? So let's dive into the answers for these questions. The first one again is the rate of the approved advances. Is it increasing over time? Do we have an estimated number of past weekly approvals versus future anticipated approvals? The answer they provided is yes, the rate of targeted EIDL advances has increased since they first started approving files back in late March. They said that in the past week, they approved over 11,000 new targeted EIDL advances for a total of $95 million. So of that 89,000, 11,000 of those were approved in the last week. Of course, we still want to see that number much higher, but they're saying that it's at least increasing. I mean, ideally, we probably want that number over 50,000 a week in order to get this thing done with as soon as possible. They said that they don't have an estimate for the rate of approvals in the coming weeks, but they're working to make the process more and more simple and be able to approve more advances as quickly as possible. Personally, if you haven't yet received this, I would not bank on receiving the EIDL advance next week or the week after that. I think it's going to be a multi-month process in order to get everyone covered here. Now, like I said, there is some good news that we're going to cover at the end, so it's not all bad, frustrating news. Then my second question was, is anything being done to speed up the process? And the answer here was they can't discuss any specific features, but they're working to implement new processes to just improve the system and overall expedite and streamline the process. And then my third question, which is the most illuminating of all, is there any other information that they can provide on these approvals, just information that people should know? And the first part of here is people may want to compare the targeted EIDL advance approvals to last year's EIDL advance program. However, they say that this isn't the best idea because the original EIDL advance program was open from the late March until mid-July. And in that time, they had 11 million applications and they approved 5.7 million of those. And the issue with that program versus this one is the last one was more possible because the criteria in order to receive the advance, the grant, was much lower and there was much lower security. So they were able to process far more applications. However, if we think back to that time, there was people still frustrated with that process because they were supposed to send out funds within 3 days. However, we all pretty much knew that wasn't possible and it ended up taking a few months for most eligible businesses. So they're saying, in contrast to the first round, there's now much higher increases in security. So you have to send in things like your tax transcript request and other verification that you're actually a legitimate business. Of course, we have seen rampant fraud with these programs in the past. So unfortunately, there's kind of a need for these additional processes in order to make sure that legitimate businesses are actually receiving this funding. And also the eligibility requirements. They're saying that those 3 main eligibility requirements make things much harder to process. Now, I know you listening to this, you're probably thinking, I don't care what they have to process. I don't care that it's more work. All I want is to receive this funding. And I agree. I want everyone to receive this funding as well. But I think it's important to understand why these things are happening because then we're just not in the dark. So having to certify that low-income community requirement, the low-income census tract, having to certify the economic loss of greater than 30%, and having to certify that you have 300 or fewer employees, of course, adds some additional workload to the process in getting applications actually passed here. Now, this is the exciting part about this. The silver lining with this unfortunate data, unfortunate news, the fact that you may have to wait longer than expected in order to receive this $10,000. The targeted EIDL advance approval report doesn't show how many businesses have actually applied for the program. So they're saying that there's about 9 million businesses who have applied for the EIDL program, but less than 1 million of those businesses have actually applied for the targeted EIDL advance. So 89,000 of 1 million is 8.9%. So an approval rate of 8.9% so far, which that in itself, not great, but that's not the good news. Of that million, just over 540,000 applications have been declined, and over 320,000 applications are still processing. The rest have been approved, which is that 89,000 figure. But what this means, if there's only 1 million businesses that have applied so far, this is far lower than the expectation for the program, for the number of businesses that the SBA expected to apply for the program. They expected about 3.5 million businesses to apply for this program. However, they haven't. 2.5 million of those have not applied. Now, what this means is there's a lot of funding that's going to be left over. And because of that, this means that businesses who applied for the EIDL program after December 27th, the current deadline, are very likely to have additional funding here. And then depending on how much funding is left there, we may see a scenario where this program is opened up to all businesses, all who apply, or maybe they lessen the criteria a little bit because it's very likely that there will be a ton of additional funding here. So if we go back to that data, if we calculate the average targeted advance size, it comes out to $8,169. And the latest 2 stimulus bills approved $30 billion in funding for targeted advances, for only targeted advances. So that means there's the potential funding for 3,672,000 businesses to receive that EIDL targeted advance. That's not even including the $5,000 advance that's going to go to a million additional businesses. So if only 1 million businesses have applied and most of them aren't going to get approved, there's a ton of funding left for businesses who either applied late or haven't applied at all, or there's a possibility of lessening the criteria, or the possibility of funding left over, which could mean very exciting things for small business owners who maybe don't hit that criteria. Of course, we can't bank on anything, but the more funding that's left, the more likely the odds that this funding gets reallocated to other businesses, and that's something that I am personally very excited about. So there's the good and the bad here. We have a low approval rate that's a little bit frustrating. That's going to take a while to get everyone approved. However, because this program isn't quite as popular as expected, there's a ton of funding left over, which means those who are more interested in it will have access to this funding, and that is a net benefit in my opinion. So I hope that this was illuminating. I hope that this helped you understand better what the heck is going on with your EIDL targeted advance right now. And I would just like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day.